Hey, I'm 𝗓𝗏𝗁 with 𝗪𝗀𝗀, helping you understand the blockchain and meat space arena. Today with a focus on the DY, or Decentralized Wireless space. Now this space used to be just one company, now it's two with a third coming on fast. And I wanted to take some time and just go through the state of the space as it exists now. If you learn best by reading, I've got a blog post on this over on the 𝗪𝗀𝗀 blog. But if you learn best by watching, let's jump into this thing. So helium, as we know it, started out in an uncontested space in 𝗲𝗏. No one really cared about 𝗲𝗏 in 2019, 2020. You could have tried to wipe it off the face of the earth as a pestilential threat, or you could have stated that you were going to make it an interplanetary protocol. Nobody cared. It was an uncontested space, and that is why helium targeted it. They targeted an uncontested space that nobody cared about, that was potentially big. They knew what the value of it could be, along with probably a couple other dozen folks around the world, but no one really took it that seriously. As helium built it out, and helium as we knew it then and know it now are two slightly different things, but as they built it out, it became a giant example of what a blockchain and meat space project, specifically now in the decentralized wireless world, but also in the larger decentralized world, could do. Why is that? Well, helium took with pretty limited resources, just a couple dozen people working on the code and the software and the marketing and the rest of it, as well as enough to seed their first round of devices, which are now less than 1% of all devices on the network. They took a pretty small amount of money and built the largest LoRaWAN global network that exists. And a lot of people took note of that for a bunch of different reasons. Maybe like you and I, we wanted to use the network, or you wanted to earn crypto on it. A lot of people wanted to earn crypto, and they did. A lot of people did, certainly in the early days. But we are getting through that period, and we're getting into kind of the next stage of what is happening in the decentralized wireless space. And that's what's pretty exciting to explore, and to make sure that you're asking the right questions about what's going to happen next, and making sure you understand where we are right now. So one of the cool things that helium did was it got people excited about radio. Right before helium came along, no one had really heard about 𝗲𝗏. Very few people had even heard about CBRS, and now we're in a point where hundreds of thousands of people around the world are familiar with it, and in some cases deeply familiar. So pretty exciting thing that helium did just on that kind of engineering geeky side, is get people excited about technology. Okay, so that is 𝗲𝗏. 𝗲𝗏 was exciting. 𝗲𝗏 is now widespread. It's a network that's been built that can be used by anyone. There are companies building on it right now, but it has nowhere near the kind of use that it needs in order to keep sustaining itself long term. If you want to check out some of those companies, check out trackpack.io. That's pack with just a C, no K. Or uplinkengine.com is another company building on. There's plenty of others. You can find them on Helium's website as well as mine, but suffice to say, it is not a network that is getting a ton of use right now. The next step in the evolution of this whole decentralized wireless area was when Helium announced in April of 2021, so over a year ago, that they were entering the 5G space. Now, when they said 5G, they really meant data only on phones on a really small slice of spectrum from 3.55 gigahertz to 3.7 gigahertz. A lot of us didn't know what that meant. We just thought it was really exciting. We could put our phones on there and we could go with the kind of original way that we had explained helium to people, even when it was 𝗲𝗏, that it's kind of like having your own cell tower on your house. Now, that is true enough in big picture terms, but in the small picture, or in the details, that's not true at all. We're only using a very small slice of the spectrum. We're not using the whole spectrum that cell phones use. We're only using part of it that is okay for data, so we're not using voice or text. And we've got a fairly large problem in that the radios that we're using to provide that coverage are radios that are on the lowest priority of the users on the particular band of spectrum that we have. So above us in priority, at the very top of it is the US government. Below that is what are called priority access license users, so people who have paid to use it. And then we're down at the bottom. Now, right now, a lot of people aren't using it, so it's okay if we cruise on, we broadcast out our signal, we process other signals, we pass those back to the internet, all that's well and good. As that space gets more and more crowded, you can expect us to be kicked off, and this is kind of the hopeful part, that Helium or the other folks out there, the other decentralized wireless companies out there, of whom I'll talk in a minute, are going to strike deals with the networks and say, look, you paid for the license. We've got a giant group of people who have deployed hardware that can actually allow you to use that license in places that it may not be worth it for you to go, or you just don't want to go for whatever reason. So that is kind of what is happening there. Now, one of the things that was apparent with Helium when they announced it, or apparent to me at least, or at least is an unanswered question, is why they announced it so early. They're a super smart team. I haven't seen them do anything yet that once I understood it, didn't make sense, but I still don't understand this one. They announced this 5G thing over a year before it became real, and it's still not quite there yet. You can use it, but it's certainly not where we want it to be. So I think a couple things may have happened, and this is just kind of state of the space stuff. This is how these things go, is that something forced their hand. My guess is that they thought either a major telco was going to announce something like it and kind of smash them really quickly, or another competitor would come along. Now, eventually that competitor did come along. Helium announced in April of 2021, and the competitor 𝗶𝗀 announced that they were building a slightly different 5G network in February of 2022, so about 10 months later. So Helium kind of won the race to be the first to announce, but these two companies, Helium and 𝗶𝗀, are now in this race to be the biggest and best to deploy. So one thing that should be very clear is that Helium and 𝗶𝗀 are competitors. One thing that should also be super clear is that they are like baby competitors. They're adolescents, they're juvenile competitors entering into a giant space populated with big, dangerous, well-funded, very knowledgeable other players in the game. And so if we, you and me, whoever's watching this, believe in this decentralized wireless thing, it is not the time to be picking sides. It's certainly not the time to be talking trash about one or the other. It's the time to support both of them, to understand the project, see where and how you can fit in, and then fit in as best you can, supporting both, of course, that project's goals as well as your own. And that's kind of where we are right now. So the exciting news with 5G is that unlike 𝗚𝗏, everybody knows what a cell phone is. Unlike 𝗚𝗏, everybody uses a cell phone. The data is out there, the people are out there, the technology is out there, and it's easy enough to use, right? 𝗚𝗏 technology, you still have to be pretty geeky to use it. This 5G stuff, the CBRS stuff that we're doing with the cell phone, pick up your cell phone, put in a SIM card, you're using either Helium or 𝗶𝗀 or whatever the next network is. So that is kind of the state of play right now. Is we've got two networks. One is slightly bigger than the other. They're both racing to get this thing done, and they're going up against these giant competitors that are out there. So I'll give you a little bit of a caution on this. If you're thinking about getting into 5G, and I get a lot of people asking, hey, Nick, should I buy this thing? Should I buy this 5G thing? Should I, whatever it was, is I would say, A, do not FOMO into this thing, right? FOMOing into 𝗚𝗏 early was a kind of lucky recipe for some people. FOMOing into 𝗚𝗏 late was an expensive recipe for some people. And FOMOing into 5G without knowing what you're doing or whether or not you have a good spot or how to deploy it is going to be an expensive lesson for you. So I've talked about what good spots look like in other videos. I'm not going to cover that here. Pretty straightforward stuff. What's next, right? So now we've got the state of play. We got the players that are coming out. We're going to have more players announced in the rest of the year that they're coming out with some other form of either CBRS or other form of decentralized wireless network. We're going to see a bunch of other blockchain and meat space projects. I'm covering those over in the 𝗪𝗁 crew, which is the membership I've got. If you want to learn about those, of course, you can join that over on 𝗪𝗁king.com. But let's look at what Helium or 𝗶𝗀 or whoever else might be doing. And that is going to be other wireless networks. They may be looking at Wi-Fi or CDN, content delivery networks, or VPN, virtual private networks, and allowing all of us to buy the hardware, deploy the hardware, provide the coverage, and then paying us in tokens for providing that coverage, and allowing people, ideally, who don't know anything about the token, not because it's a secret, but because it adds a layer of complexity, but allowing people to use all of the coverage that we're providing. And at the end of the day, if the coverage we're providing doesn't get used, there's no value in it, the whole thing crumbles. So it's really important that all of these projects are as successful as we can make them. So pretty important to use it and to tell your friends about it and to build on it as much as you can if you have the long-term success of the project in mind. Okay, so the questions that you want to ask with any of those, with Wi-Fi, with CDN, with VPN, with whatever else they're going to do is, number one, does it already exist, right? In most cases, yes. Number two, is it being used? In all those cases, yes. CDNs, VPNs, Wi-Fi already being used. Number three, and this is the big question, and this is the question that no one really has a great answer to, or not many people have a great answer to, is what needs to be true in order for that protocol to flourish as a decentralized protocol? That is the million or maybe billion-dollar question. And hopefully some of you have an answer for that. Whether you're watching from the Helium team, whether you're watching from Nova Labs, Helium Foundation or Nova Labs, or 𝗶𝗀 or the next network or some other network, what we're all kind of hoping for and aiming for is that someone has an answer for this and we can get behind them and figure out what needs to be true in order for a decentralized network to flourish. Now, what we found out is a lot of what does need to be true and a lot of what doesn't need to be true. We've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I say we as the general community has, and not learning enough about all these projects and not knowing enough about all these projects. And the projects are moving too fast sometimes to explain what they're doing, so it makes it even more difficult to learn about it. I would encourage you not to get your information just from YouTube or just from the internet, but take the time to interview experts, to track down experts in whatever the field is, whether it's LoRa or CBRS or radio or anything, blood glucose monitoring, and figure out what needs to happen, and then think to yourself, okay, how does making this thing decentralized make it better? In some cases, and maybe in many cases, I don't know. I think in all cases it'll eventually be the right thing to do. But right now, it's not the right thing to decentralize a project just because decentralization is cool, right? It's this bright shining thread in human history that we dissipate power, that we put power where it belongs and not in the hands of a few, that we put earnings where they belong, where they get earned, and not in the hands of distant landlords, or rent seekers, or whatever you want to call them. But it's also a difficult thing in human history to track really clearly, because that shining thread is covered with blood and guts and fat and gore and burnt, tattered threads and battles over the folks who are deploying stuff or putting stuff out there and providing value, and the folks who want to extract that value from them without providing anything in return. And that is the really exciting thing about decentralized projects in general, is that everyone is on the same page, right? Whether you're on the Helium Foundation side or the Nova Labs side or our side as deployers, we're all aiming for the same thing. We can all put our shoulder to the wheel in the same way, and with all of us working together, we can move a project that none of us could do on our own down the field until that end goal line, which is a pretty exciting thing to be part of. Okay, one of the big questions is, hey, who's going to win this competition? I think I've hit this before, but just to put a little bit of a bow on it, right now the competition is, yes, between Pollen and Helium. Don't worry about who's going to win that one. I would say split your resources, put it behind each, or think about how each one is doing whatever it is they're doing. Pollen is building more of a private network. Helium is building more of a neutral carrier. Figure out where your use case is most valuable to those teams, and then deploy your capital, resources, blood, sweat, tears, all the rest of that behind that, and see what you can do the best. But I wouldn't be picking sides yet. I am supporting both of them. To be very clear, I am pro Pollen, I am pro Helium, I am pro decentralized wireless in general, pro decentralization, and obviously pro blockchain and meat space. So the last thing to do is I'll leave you with a couple pretty interesting facts. Is we throw around numbers a lot in this world, and different numbers mean different things to people. Sometimes you hear one thing and think that's a lot of money. 𝗪𝗁𝗏 Wireless, which is a company built out of the Helium ecosystem and that came into the Pollen ecosystem, has raised $2 million to buy up hardware. So when you're buying Pollen hardware, 𝗪𝗁𝗏 Wireless has bought a lot of that. $2 million sounds like a lot of money, and even for a $10,000 radio, you can buy a lot of $10,000 radios with $2 million. Seems like a lot, right? Then you get to Helium. Helium has raised just under $400 million and is valued at just over $1 billion. That seems like a lot of money. And then you get to the telcos, and this is kind of the telling thing, is the telcos have been buying spectrum. I'm not talking about deploying hardware or paying their workforce or maintaining their network. They're just buying spectrum, just buying the rights to broadcast. They've spent, let me double check this, $258 billion with a B on buying spectrum. Okay, so when we think about the first two numbers, 2 million to buy hardware, 300 million for investment in a blockchain, it's like, oh, that sounds, just under 400 million, that sounds really big. There's going up against 258 billion that has been paid to buy all of this different spectrum. So one thing is pretty clear, is we are all going to have to work together, including the telcos, in order to make this thing work. And that brings me to a pretty interesting point that has been made by other folks, is that the telcos have spent so much money, they may not have enough to continue to deploy hardware. Now, that is debatable. That's not an absolute fact. You can find people who will say that's right or wrong, but it's out there. They spent $258 billion. It doesn't come from an unlimited war chest. It means that they're going to need our help, my help, your help, to deploy hardware. And that is how the whole thing ideally fits together. We deploy the hardware, we provide the coverage in areas where they can't spend the money to deploy the coverage, but coverage still needs to be used. And in return for providing that coverage, we get paid in tokens. They bill their customers in fiat. They're buying tokens in order to get the coverage from us, and everybody is pretty happy. Now, of course, the economics go way deeper than that. And as I said in the blog post, after looking at a bunch of different blockchain and meat space projects and seeing where they go right and where they appear to go wrong, my number 2 employee at any blockchain and meat space project would be a competent economist at any price. And that wouldn't be my last hire by a long shot, but this idea of economics and incentives driving these things and determining what is going to work or not is pretty darn important. So it is important to pay attention to these economic details, and folks who are thinking deeply about that are super valuable people, and I'd be considering heavily investing in more of that. Okay, so we talked about kind of the state of the whole space, what's going on with it, the different players in there. Hopefully you know how I feel about the two known players right now. The third player who will be announced, I'm going to feel the same way about them. I'll do my best to support them and any other project that's out there, any other blockchain and meat space project in general, whether that is WeatherXM or GeoNet or Mapmetrics or Demo or PlanetWatch or HiveMap or any of the ones out there that are nameable. I will do my best to support them because I think that this general direction, the directionality of decentralization, is an excellent one to be following for all of humankind, and that's a pretty exciting thing to be a part of. Okay, I'll wrap this up by saying if you have a project that you need help with, specifically if you need help looking at either the incentives or in just making sure that people are educated about your project and they don't have the same frustrations that people have had about some of these early projects that didn't have time to do all the marketing up front, I'd love to help you build an education plan and make sure that your constituents, your customers, your clients, your however you want to think of them, your community knows what's going on the whole time. The more that we all know about what's going on, the better our decisions are, and then the less friction there is throughout the community so that we can all make great, well-informed decisions together. Okay, that wraps it for the day. Again, my name is Nick Hawks with 𝗪𝗁_King. If you want to read more of my stuff, go to the 𝗪𝗁�king.com blog, or .com website. And of course, if you want to get into the inner circle, join the 𝗪𝗁 crew, which you can find on 𝗪𝗁�king.com. Rock and roll!